It's actually, that's a bit intimidating. It's the normal word used, or one of the normal words used for a director. In the theatre, first of all, and then in the cinema. So in other words, there are two possible words to use in French. You can say réalisateur, the person who makes the film real, or makes the play real, or metteur en scène. But metteur en scène is probably the commonest, and so in normal, everyday French terminology, just like genre only means type or kind, metteur en scène simply means director. All right? And it starts off in the theatre. And it starts off about the time that cinema begins. 1890s, 1900s, something like that the term is coined. Why? Well, the person who is supposed to have been the first to use the term metteur en scène is a French theatre director called André Antoine. And he was close to the writer Émile Zola and the naturalist movement. So I suppose the idea in the theatre is that the director in the theatre is not so much there to direct as to put everything into its proper place, to compose the scene and catch what is natural rather than direct something to be unnatural. That is the sort of naturalistic philosophy, if you like, that lies behind the use of the term in the first place. Now, as I say, it would be used for any director, however they regard themselves. But initially, that was how it was seen. A metteur en scène was a way of saying a director is not really a director. A director is somebody who simply catches the reality by creating the composition, by putting everything into the scene. The mise en scène, therefore, is just the noun. Metteur en scène, somebody who puts in scene. Mise en scène, the putting in scene. So, initially, the meaning of it is as simple as that. What I suppose arises in cinema, a little bit different from theatre. André Antoine, incidentally, did also make films. There's one that is possible to find, which I can't immediately recall the title, which is a wonderful silent film in very naturalistic style about a journey on a barge. It was never actually shown at the time because the cinema company, in this case Pathé, thought it was too much like a documentary and refused actually to show it. And I don't think it was shown until something like the 1980s. But it's actually a wonderful film, a wonderful example of naturalistic cinema. So in the cinema you have, I suppose, another factor coming into play, that unlike a drama, you can't with a play cut it up and re-edit it, all right? You're only able to put it into scene. But with a film, you have the second possibility, which again has a French word attached to it, which comes from photography, which is montage. So as with photographs, you can cut them up and rearrange them. Right? So that's the origin of that sort of dualism, which then develops in cinema between montage, which is the editing, the cutting up, and mise en scène, which, if you like, is the composition. And those two elements, and the importance given to those two elements, are quite important, I think, in evaluating both a film and evaluating traditions of film. Again, if we come back to this comparison between the US cinema and the European cinema, I think it would be fair to say that right from the beginning, right from the 1890s, the concentration in European cinema is much more strongly on composition, right? On the mise en scène. And it's in US cinema that you first really have the development of considerable amount of editing and the emphasis shifting towards montage. Yeah? You then have, for instance, in different things that come into play in other traditions of European cinema, so that montage gets taken up very much, as I'm sure you know, by the Russian social realist filmmakers. Sergei Eisenstein is the most famous, but there's also Pudovkin, there's also the Ukrainian, whose name I'm not going to be able to remember, but is something like Dozhensky, all right? The three great Russian directors of that period. And they also put the emphasis on montage, but for rather different reasons, because they want to have this dramatic effect on the viewer. Rather than appeal, as if you like, on an intellectual level, they're more interested in appealing on a sort of gut reaction level by that fast montage, fast editing between different images, which is supposed to almost to have a subliminal effect on the person watching the film. So the montage at that period becomes more emphasized, if you like, than mise en scène, the composition. In, say, the 1940s in the US, with a film like Citizen Kane, you get a move back in the other direction, away from montage and towards much more importance being given to the mise en scène. Of course, it's still important how you edit the film, it's still important how you cut it up, but the composition comes back into importance. If you think about many films, all you're ever seeing is the sort of action at the very front of the screen, as it were. Everything is between those characters who are immediately in play, and the background is just a sort of haze. So you have, with Citizen Kane, you have a return, and it is a return because this had already existed in silent films, a return to importance to what was called deep focus, where you're seeing just as clearly what's happening in the background, and what's happening in the background is just as important in the composition as what's happening in the foreground. So that's it, really. I mean, you simply, whereas in theatre, putting into scene was simply the capturing of something, but the capture was supposed to be the capturing of something that was real, that was natural. In cinema, you have the two elements: the putting into scene, which is the capturing of the real, and the montage, which is the editing process and the cutting. And in a sense, the sort of film you're going to produce and the tempo of your film, the speed of your film, because obviously the more you cut, the more montage you have, the faster moving your film is. One of the reasons why US films will normally be much faster moving, much more moving always towards action films, and why European films will naturally be much slower in their movement, is again precisely because of that different emphasis, on the one hand on montage, on the other hand on mise en scène. Right? But you can't say, obviously, mise en scène is better, montage is better. Both are part of the weaponry that the filmmaker has to play with, but the different emphasis you give to one or the other will produce automatically a different kind of film.
Okay.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah.